Hello and welcome to another Retropower Uncut. I can't remember what number it is, but I know it's getting perilously close to a year. 49 I'm told, so it's 3 weeks away from it being a year since we first started these. That's flown by, goodness. Right, so we're starting in the new part of the workshop where the last week has been the final 2 concrete pours. So the first of which was finishing off the concreting in of the new inspection pit, and then the second of which was laying the slab for the new 2-post lifts over there. The floor in this building is not particularly level, so we've basically cast 2 level slabs, hence there's a slight ramp up to them on one side and a slight dip down on the other. But yeah, that's looking good, and we're getting pretty close now to making this a usable part of the workshop. So Nat's just been flailing around on what looks like the least out of control tool I've seen used. It's a floor sander, which appears to just be a jagged metal disc sandwiched to the floor only by weight underneath what looks like a huge dual action sander. I had a quick go on it, and it was taking me for a walk around the room, so I quickly decided to stop that. But he's going to sand the floor. Then I think probably Monday, Tuesday next week, we'll be doing the floor painting. This wall will be coming out. Got to paint that wall and put the airline rails up, and that is about it. So hopefully, probably not quite next week, but I'd say the week after, hopefully this will be a usable part of the workshop and you'll see cars in here. And on the subject of cars, let's go this way. So you remember last week, we saw Stu doing the cold air intake fabrication on this. So I've just been out test driving the Jag. Really happy with it. It really is a great car, this. It looks stunning, but it's because they were fundamentally a good design in terms of the suspension originally. It's so composed, and we didn't need to, when we built this originally, years ago, we didn't need to radically alter it. It's the original front suspension, albeit with different springs, dampers and bushes. It's essentially a standard rear subframe. It's the later one from an XJS with the outboard discs and a limited slip diff. But fundamentally, it is still Jag suspension on it. It's just a fantastic thing to drive. So Stu was finishing off the air intake setup. I think that's explained last week that because we've swapped it from an Omex engine management system to the GM engine management system, it now has an airflow meter, and that airflow meter needs to be in a reasonable length of straight air intake ducting, which means we couldn't have the air filter sat back where it used to be. It needed to be really in front of the radiator. And that meant but the height above the radiator is only very narrow. So Stu fabricated this beautiful integrated duct into the top of the slam panel, which ducts sort of from that airflow meter inlet to the throttle body, fans it out above the radiator, and then it has 4 really small compact K&N filters on the front there, because they were the only filters we could find that basically had the right intake area, physically would fit in the space, and had an appropriate cross-sectional area on the outlets of them. So yeah, that's done. 100%. Really happy with the car. Let's go inside. It's been a good week for sort of exciting changes this week. The thing that's sitting on the side here is the chrome batch for Project Utah. So this is the second batch of chrome which we've been waiting for. It's the things that we knew weren't really going to hold up other parts of the build, but nonetheless it's been exciting to get them here because they're also things that will cosmetically transform the car a lot. So we've got things like the front grille, all of the side trims, which on the very long rear one is a remodeled version of the original. It's been basically taken to a point. Stu made a little brass point, so they taper to a point rather than being cut off square at the end. We've got the windscreen seal inserts. These are the parts for the hinges for the rear seat armrest. And then there's all sorts of custom parts. So you probably remember the overriders that we designed, that Richard Stubley at Autodesk machined for us from brass. And they looked amazing in brass, and lots of people said, oh, you should leave them brass, which we agree. The brass colour looked great against the green, but now you see them in chrome, you probably realise why we wanted to chrome them. Derby Plating have done an absolutely incredible job of these. So to go into a little bit of the detail, the lamp here is actually the indicator. So the tail lights on the car, which we'll have a look at in a minute, are just stop and tail lights, and these are the indicators. We've got number plate lamps built in at the back of the car, which we already showed you, and then there'll be reverse lights hidden underneath the valance. So on these, this is all Richard's work. You see there's a groove in here which we perhaps didn't show you previously for an O-ring, which will sit against the body to obviously protect it from chafing the body. And then these which retain them, they go through a tube that we fabricated into the shell when we were doing the metalwork and bolt in from inside the boot. And this was Richard's idea, to be fair. He's built a ball joint into the end of them so that the exact alignment of this versus the shape of the car couldn't go wrong. Essentially, it will always pull straight because it's got a ball joint in there. So amazing bits of detail. And then the wiring. We talked about running the wiring down the centre of this, but in the end we decided it was excessive to do that, and you'd have the wire bumping out inside the boot. So we're putting another hole through above in the rear panel and running the wiring inside the rear panel. So that's the culmination of a lot of work. If you think back, or if you've watched the series throughout, you'll remember we sculpted these initially in foam. I think I probably did about 10 versions in foam. Sort of a lot of them I wasn't happy with, and then when I got to the ones I was sort of happy with, sending photos to the owner to see if he was happy with them, and then eventually we arrived on a shape we were happy with and a position for the light. Then Richard came over, 3D scanned the foam model, 3D scanned the car where it attaches to, went away, drew the CAD model of them, machined a trial one in aluminium which we tried on the car. Once we were happy with that, he went away, did the final brass versions. We double checked the fitment of those on the car, and then we sent them off to Derby Plating to be chromed, and they came back end of last week. These are what would have originally been horn grills, so they're actually quite similar to the original horn grill design. They've just got more widely spaced fins, and on our car they're not horns behind here, they're air intakes, so we wanted to get minimal amount of interruption to the airflow, hence we designed our own. So these were drawn in-house by Adam on Fusion 360, machined by Darren at Alitech from brass again, and then chromed by Derby Plating. And then if we have a little wander through, you'll see the other sort of custom part that we've had chromed, which is the rear lamp bezels. So if we have a little wander around here, if you wait there, Jarkle, the rear lamp bezels, which was another 3D scanning operation. So we had the rear of the car 3D scanned. We'd already planned and made a recess in here for the rear lights to sit when we were at the metalwork phase, and planned there to be a bezel around the light. So we left enough of a gap between the lamp unit and the metalwork of the shell for that. But when it came to the exact design, it was 3D scanned by Alistair Pugh this time. He then did the CAD model for the lamp bezels. We did a 3D print one from that, trialled it, we were happy with that. So then they were machined from brass by Alitech, and again Derby Plating did the chrome. So that's looking awesome. Other things back from chrome, the rear door handles. If you remember back a few episodes, we were ranting and raving about the fact that the new reproduction door handles you get for Mark II Jags are all front ones. So you can buy them as a full set of 4, or you can buy rears, but they're actually fronts, and there is a difference in that this rear edge is tilted forward more on the rear one compared to the front. And when we picked that up on with the supplier, they said, oh, it depends how fussy you are, which will stick in my mind forever, I think. So these are actually the front ones are repro, the rears are the original ones which we had re-chromed. And the door builds are the thing which is pretty much just being buttoned up at the minute. So James was fitting the door cards, fitting the upholstered armrests. He's just got to do the rear ones as well now. And that will pretty much complete the build of the doors, apart from fitting these chrome strips which you've just seen in reception. And then the wood parts, which I believe are just about done. So I'm hoping maybe next week they'll be back as well. And that, once we get those back, we really can just fire on and complete all of the rest of the interior. At the minute, I'm just looking forward to seeing the rest of the chrome on, seeing the side mouldings on, the grille fitted, and the intake grills will be great. The headlamp bezels have been fitted, and that really finishes off the look of the headlights nicely. So that's where we're at with that. The Manta, the main thing we've been on with, we're sort of doing some interior work on this at the minute. The owner wants it quite sort of simple. The rear basically boarded out, but obviously we don't want it to look like the inside of a transit van, so we're introducing quite a few nice curved radiuses into that. The main thing we've been working on is the speakers. Customer wanted speakers in the footwell, in the kick panels, so Clive's been fabricating aluminium kick panels with a sort of raised pod on them for the speakers to fit into, which are done. I think we'll either be upholstering those in vinyl or possibly flocking them. Not 100% sure on that yet. And the next thing he's going to be doing is finishing off that rear bulkheading, and there's going to be a harness bar which goes across here as well. So then the next job's on that. So that's where we're at with that. Let's go. I have had a bit of a cold, which is just clearing up, so you have to excuse if I sound like I've got a blocked up nose, it's because I have, and if I'm sniffing even more than normal, it's because I've got a cold. Right, go through this way. So, the Land Cruiser, I can't remember exactly where we're up to last week, but certainly what we've been on with, Tom has been on with, is the new floor pans. Now the floors were pretty ropey. You remember they were all full of filler and they'd been carefully sculpted all the ribs in them. Now we're aware that there is a panel supplier in the States who's got press tools for quite a lot of the panels, and we have actually ordered some. So for instance, that offside quarter, which we discovered a lot of old repairs on, we're getting one of those from there. We're getting all the sections to repair the rear cross member. But with the floors, it didn't really make sense to get repair panels because we knew we were cutting a lot of it out for the fuel tank recesses we're building. And also the shape where it goes around the transmission is going to be different anyway, so it made no real sense to get standard repair panels. So Tom's been on with making up the new floor pans. The owner has no particular desire for originality, so we didn't need to replicate the exact original ribs. We've just done some sensible ribs pressed in to go around the shape of the fuel tank recess that we're doing. Scott finished off some repairs on the bottom of the pillars and at the front of the inner sill area there, ready for the floors to go in. And then most of what Tom's been on with is actually fabricating these fuel tank recesses. So eventually this will become part of the floor pan. And the idea is that it allows us to sit the fuel tank down into a recess and make, which it did originally on the far side, but only about as deep as this shallow section. But actually, once you get outboard of the chassis leg, there's no reason you can't drop the tank down quite a lot further. Now, obviously, we don't want to go lower than the chassis leg so it doesn't get damaged, but we've dropped a section of this down to almost flush with the bottom of the chassis leg, and then done a mirror image. So this is actually for this side, and there'll be a mirror image which he's making now for the other side. By the time we've got two of these dropped into the floor, we've got a serious amount of fuel tank capacity without really compromising any space inside the cabin. So that's the idea of where we're going with that lot. As I say, he's doing the other one. As soon as they're done, he'll cut the holes out of the new floor pan panels, let them in, so the floor pan becomes a complete piece with that in it, and then they'll be ready to go into the shell then. And then we're just waiting at the moment for the replacement panels to do the various repairs I just talked about. The only other thing we've done, Scott was just cleaning up some of the removable panels, so the doors and the rear doors. Because we were ordering repair sections from the States, we wanted to just see if there was any repair sections needed for those, so we could get it all in one hit. Generally they were really good. I think the front doors have been replaced in the past with new ones. One of the rear doors was fine, the other rear door had been repaired pretty badly, so we're getting the lower inner and outer repair sections for that. But other than that, that's the whole sort of batch of repair panels coming. Yeah, looking forward to seeing this floor take shape. And next thing, the Chevette. It's probably the moment we've all been waiting for. Gaz and Steve finished all the paintwork on the removable panels last week, and so we were able to finally see it with all its arches and everything together, which I say it a million times here, people are probably sick of hearing me saying it, but it's one of the most ridiculously amazing transformations when you look back at when this car arrived, which actually is in one of the Uncut series, so it must be in one of the earlier ones. You can see it when it arrived, sort of bright yellow, really narrow, high up, sort of old lady shopping car. And the transformation to how it sits now is just amazing, really. You sort of forget how it looked originally. So excited now to just get on with the build work on it. The seats arrived today from Motor Drive, carbon fibre seats. We had a mock-up one which they lent us during fabrication, so we've already fabricated all the metalwork in the car, knowing that these seats will fit. But these are the final ones. They've got our logo embroidered into them, but in black against black, so it's subtle. I mean, that's the theme throughout this car. We've called it Project Vader from the start because we really want everything to be black. So the wheels are going to be black. I know it's a controversial choice, but pretty much everything on the car will be black, just with the odd, very small red detail. So there's a red stitch on the seat, There'll be some red anodised parts like the extinguisher button on the scuttle, a couple of red anodised parts in the engine bay, but essentially it's black on black on black. So yeah, can't wait to get on with the build work on that. And then Morris, we're into some of the finer detail work on this. I think, I forget exactly where we were at last week, but certainly the bulk of what Stu's been on with is really awkward to get two bits behind the dash. So I don't know if he'd done it last week, but he was working on the coolant and AC hoses where they pass through the bulkhead, which is a ridiculously awkward to get to space. There's not much space behind the engine, and then there's also not much space in here. They actually come out just above where the head unit sits in here. They sit, the back of the pipe sits just above the back of the head unit, so it's all extremely tight, and then trying to pack everything else in. So we've got to have ducts coming from demist outlets on here to the demist vents, and from the main outlets on here to these vents, and that has been incredibly tight, to the extent where we're actually having to tee together the two of the demist outlets to a sort of compromise size of duct that's somewhere between. It's bigger than one of these, but not as big as two. Routed across, and then he's done a fabricated tubular little manifold up here that then splits that back out to the 2D mist vents. There will be 3D printing a manifold to come off these to split it over to here, just so we can get a really tight bend, and the same applies to the main vent ducts as well. We'll be 3D printing really tight elbows off these to get duct work in to bring them down to here, because you've got not only those ducts, you've then got the aircon, refrigerant and water lines coming up behind here. There's the hot water shut-off valve, which is now mounted just behind here, which is what opens and closes the hot water flow to the heater unit. We've got to have room for the instrument, and on that subject, actually, we're getting a sort of 6-gauge pod, which has tacho, speedo, oil pressure, voltage, coolant temperature, and fuel level from Classic Instruments in the States, who we use quite a lot. And it's one of their standard sizes is, I think, 5.5 or 5 3/4 inch, which is a little bit bigger than this existing hole. But it kind of made sense to us, rather than have a bespoke, slightly smaller instrument made, which would have been possible. It's going to be more cost effective just to alter the aperture. So Stu's made this piece, which will be welded in here to enlarge the aperture, and it also flares it out slightly, which personally I think looks nicer anyway, but also gives us the gauge slightly further out, gives us a little bit more room to play with behind it. He's then been working on the mounting provision. These blocks of wood are representing things, so that will be a ECU Master PDU representation, and there's another block somewhere which is an Omex 600 engine ECU representation. So this bracket that's in here, which sits above the master cylinders, there'll be 2 ECU Master PDUs on top of that, and then an Omex engine ECU sitting on its side across here, which pretty much takes up every bit of space we've got left there, once you account for the plumbing pipes that are going to come out of those master cylinders. So yes, all rather tight. I forget what Stu's actually working on now. Stu, what are you up to now? Yes, bonnet caches. So we're going to be tackling the electric windows soon. We had a look at the feasibility of the Defender lifters, but that wasn't going to work. So we're now looking at another system, which is like a rack and pinion drive setup, rather than the quadrant lift arm, which we think will allow us to put the motor in a more suitable place. So that's one of the things we'll be getting onto. In the meantime, he's just doing the bonnet latches, which is probably one of the few remaining complicated jobs left to do. So we're going to have the normal kind of pin with a spring round it type latch on each side, which goes into essentially a hole with another plate underneath it with a hole in it, which goes to one side and clicks the pin in. Typical bonnet latch. The lower part of that Stu's actually making, because there wasn't anything pre-existing on another car that was exactly what we wanted. I think the upper pin we usually Mark 1 Golf pins into a custom platform, but we'll see those come together over the coming weeks. And yeah, looking forward to this reaching the end of metalwork, because there's certainly light at the end of the tunnel there now. Electric windows, bonnet latches, then there's a few sort of detail jobs still to do on it. We've got to do some work on the rear valance for the reverse and fog lights, and then I think that's pretty much it. So very, very much looking forward to seeing this reach the end of metalwork and go through to Gaz and Steve for paint. And on that note, I think that's it for this week. So Well, you have to tune in next week, and in the meantime, Nat mentioned last week that the Retropower mugs were going to be available soon. They are now available in the shop on our website, so don't subscribe, just go straight to our web shop and buy these mugs. I'll see you again next week. Bye.